Morning and welcome to the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Today is Thursday, November 25th, and it is 9:31. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are coming to you from the territory of the Shishalt and Squamish Nations. Before we get started, I'd like to, well, we have to, how do we do this? Do we appoint a vice chair first, or we adopt the agenda and then appoint a vice chair? Probably have to be in the meeting, right? Have to be in the meeting?
Yes. We've called to order, then we can appoint the vice
perfect.
chair.
Perfect. So, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda, first of all? All right, seeing none, I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And then, given our procedure bylaw, as it is, we do not have the vice chair in the room, so we need to appoint a vice chair. So I'd look for a motion to appoint Leonard Lee as vice chair. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. So before we get into our delegation, I'd look for a motion to adopt all of the reports, or receive all the reports. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. All right, we're going to start with our delegation. We have Corey Vanderhorst with Mnp Llp Auditors. Welcome, Corey.
Good morning. Quick mic check. Everybody hear me okay?
You could be a little louder.
Okay, I can talk a little bit closer to the, hopefully this works. Usually I have no problem talking loud. So when we get to do this in person, that'll be better. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and the board. You do have a good summary in your package from your Chief Financial Officer. But I wanted to have an opportunity to present to the board and give an opportunity for questions. So for some of you, you know me, you know our firm, those of you from the district, but for some of the area directors and other directors, new to the Sunshine Coast Regional District this year. So our audit service plan is a little bit different from your predecessor auditor. Not a whole lot of new stuff to draw to your attention this year. Thankfully, not a lot of accounting changes for 2021, but some highlights there. We are, of course, going to be doing the audit as remotely as possible for the safety of your staff and ours and the current pandemic conditions. That's the game plan for this year. It will be, of course, readdressed moving forward into the future of what the impact would be and how we would do it. The other highlight on the audit service plan is an accounting standard that is a few years away in asset retirement obligations. That is one to keep on your radar. We will be talking about it again over the years. It's going to be a big change coming. Your finance team is gearing up for it. I do have a presentation I'd be happy to give that goes into a little bit more detail in a future meeting or a presentation opportunity. But it's going to be a lot of work for the finance team over the next few years, and so it is just something to flag. Other than that, as new auditors this year, we're hoping to be able to provide a little bit of a different perspective on some things. So hopefully looking forward to working with Tina and the finance team and maybe having some interesting things to bring to the table for them. I'll pause there. Are there any questions about the audit service plan or the audit approach this year?
Thank you. Directors, any questions? Director McMahon.
Right, on page 2, item number 2, I'd like an example of a planning transaction around contributed tangible capital assets that wouldn't be detected by financial services. I was trying to figure out what that meant.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, and sorry for clarification, you were talking, page 2 of the Chief Financial Officer's report. Yeah, so what you've got in that document is some comments from BDO, the prior year auditor, One of the things that we will do is, and I have already talked to Tina about this, is we will look at those comments from BDO. We'll assess whether movement has been made on any areas that are of concern. That one specifically, as that was from the prior auditor, I can't speak to what exactly they were seeing, but we will have discussion and interview around with the finance team around these items, and whether they agree with risks or whether we still see ongoing risks there. And I don't know if Tina wants to jump in and address that.
It looks like Tina's got her hand up. Go ahead, Tina.
Yes, just to identify specifically what some of those instances are things such as contributed assets from our developers. And sometimes that information does flow through to the finance division, and sometimes it doesn't. So again, it was identified to improve our business processes, which finance and the various divisions in the organization have been doing that. So again, when we get new infrastructure from a development and take that online, sometimes we have to ensure that's included in our financial statements, our tangible capital assets, and sometimes we've not always known about them, and so have not included them or included them at a later date.
And if I might jump in, generally that is a trickier area with a lot of the communities that we work with, is making sure you capture that information. So we do ask about it in the course of our audit, and inquire not just with finance, but with other departments who might be, permitting, planning, those types of departments who might know about a project that finance hasn't become aware of yet.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I have a question on page 2 as well. This is with regards to the recommendation about the policies on employee benefits and compensation. I'm wondering where we are with that. And I think Tina's probably the one who's going to have to answer that one as well. Thanks.
Yes, Chair. A lot of those have reside within either our HR division and through to administration. So there has been some progress on some of those, but probably not as much as we had hoped through this year. So we look to report back as part of the audit for this year and year-end processes as far as progressing those along. Some are a little more critical from a financial transaction perspective. So we just need to identify which ones are more critical than the others.
So then during the audit, would you be working with the CAO and HR to ensure that a plan's put in place to address what needs to be addressed?
I believe that would be ideal. I think we'd want to work with our auditors to identify a little bit more as to which one they would think is more critical, because of course our prior auditors had that information. So some of that information wouldn't necessarily progress. So we'd want to ensure that we get their feedback on that as well to further inform other divisions. And again, sometimes they don't always, they'll work directly with the HR division as well as part of the audit.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. We're taking questions on the actual report. So page 14 is okay. Thanks. It was the client portal website that I'm just wondering, is this something that is strictly for administration and yourselves, or does the board have access to this client portal website? Thanks.
Thank you, Director. It's a good question. Traditionally, what we use the portal for is sharing of information during the audit. It is a secure Canadian server, so again, not in the US, where day-to-day transactional information will be shared. It's not generally something we've used for board information. However, it's a possibility that if the board wants to have the ability to see the audit process, full transparency there. There's no issue with that. We would be happy to talk with Tina and your team about giving access. Usually there are two spots in the portal. One is the day-to-day audit work we are doing currently and in the spring. And another one is an ongoing where some of our reports and other things are in. That might be the spot that the board would be interested to see, where you've got continuous access to this audit service plan, our audit findings in the spring, and anything like that. Although most of that information is also posted on your portal, so it would be a duplication of some of that documentation. But happy to make that happen.
So the documents that you'd be posting there would be the same as what gets presented to us as a board?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I have another question. This is on page 12. This is page 5 in your audit service plan.
Mhm.
So you've got the new PS 3280 asset retirement obligations. We know that we've seriously underfunded our landfill, like our landfill closure, requirements, liabilities. So if this comes in, what is the impact on current underfunding?
So the current impact we're expecting is an adjustment to the liability that's shown on the balance sheet. The new standard changes how you account for landfill. You've got a liability sitting on the balance sheet right now. We'll tweak how that gets accounted for in 2023. With respect to funding, it's not necessarily going to have any impact on that. I would expect there's still some no disclosure around reserve levels or current funded levels, and we would continue to have that disclosure. The biggest change you're going to see from this is, not to get too far into the details, but currently landfill liability is prorated to capacity. So if it's 70% used, you're recording 70% of the liability. That component, that prorating to volume used versus capacity available, is going to go away. So theoretically, the liability on the books is going to go up. That does depend on the timing around the landfill, around what your plans are for phases and when they would have shutdown or capping. So there's lots of details to go through there. But the one thing I can say for certain, there'll be an adjustment to that landfill liability number in 2023.
Thank you. So we can anticipate it's going to go up.
I would, if I was a betting man,
Yes,
I would
we have
say
4 or 5 years left in the landfill. So yes. we
Yeah,
anticipate
if it's close to end of life, yeah.
All right. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm on page 16. It's the chart, the overall reliance, the low, moderate, and high. We're using a low reliance. I'm just, if you could say something more about why low versus moderate or high. I'm just trying to understand that chart a little bit more.
Absolutely. So, and maybe I'll take a step back into how we look at controls and the internal controls at the regional district. We look at, there's 3 areas. There's design of the control, there's how it's implemented, and then there's, is it working effectively? So we will analyze the design and the implementation of all your controls. So we're asking right now your team to provide us with descriptions of the controls. We'll go through, we call it a cradle to grave walkthrough. We look at the system, make sure it's working. And then the effectiveness of that control is where this low, moderate, high comes into in the context of our audit. So traditionally, over the last probably 5 or more years, we have backed away from testing the controls. That is not a reflection of the controls at the regional district. That is a reflection of audit efficiency. For example, if I want to have reliance on some of the controls, I might have to test them 25 times to see if they're working. Or I could go to the end of the year and test that same transaction 10 times. So in an effort to keep costs to the regional district down, we have decided that the most efficient audit approach is not to test whether the controls are working, but to look at the actual outcome of the numbers at the end of the year in your financial statements. So again, the placing low reliance is purely an audit efficiency approach and not a reflection on the regional district.
Thank you. Any other questions by directors? All right, seeing no further questions, if you go to page 1, there's a recommendation with regards to the audit service plan. And what would you like to do? Director McMahon.
I'd be happy to move the recommendation on page 1.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. No further questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, moving on to Annex B on page 19. This is with regards to directors' roles and responsibilities. Over to our CAO.
Yes, thank you very much. Hopefully the report is straightforward enough, and we've got some attached roles and responsibility sheets, and we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, short and sweet. All right. We did, during the agenda review, we noticed one minor change to page 26. This is attachment C. Talks about municipal director, but at the bottom, in the time commitment availability, it refers to electoral area directors. So that will need to be changed to municipal directors. Any questions, comments? Director McMahon.
Yeah, it seems that these are the same versions that we had before, so they haven't been changed. So are we wordsmithing in a meeting? That seems like a sort of an inefficient way to go about this.
Okay. Director, corporate officer.
Thank you, Chair. So our staff's understanding at the last meeting was to bring back the roles and responsibilities as they were originally drafted, along with the director's comments. Our understanding at the time is there was more discussion that needed to be had around it. So we did provide a track changes version to the directors to kind of help guide through, these are the changes you've already recommended that have been adopted. And I think now is an opportunity to add to that or to just affirm the changes that have already been made.
Director McMahon.
But the changes haven't been made in the version that we're looking at here.
In the agenda package?
Yeah,
No, we brought forward the original. But we did upload the track changes version as a late item yesterday.
right, I saw that, but in things like, we had flagged customer service as not being, the phrase that we wanted.
Yes.
But there's no suggested alternative. So how are we going to sit in this meeting and try to brainstorm better wording, or do we take it to a committee to create a better draft? Because I just don't think this is a terrifically good use of our time to sit here and argue about commas.
However the directors wish to proceed, we're open to that.
Okay, directors, how would you like to deal with this? Do we want to take this offline and do some wordsmithing and submit that to staff? Director Beamish?
Chair, the only thing I had to comment on municipal director is I'd like some acknowledgement that they are appointed annually by the municipal council in there, sort of thing. And probably even just in that introductory comment there, it says municipal directors are appointed annually by the municipal council to represent the municipality and government. Just so it's an annual recognition.
It's not necessarily annually.
Yeah, I was just going to say that too.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily annually. They're
Are
appointed.
appointed by, okay, well, that's fine
Appointed by,
too,
yes.
That's how they get there. Yeah.
Okay. Director McMahon, you have a lot of changes, suggested changes?
I think we should take this to a subcommittee, and I'm even willing to volunteer to be on the subcommittee. But I did have one question. It was under the chair responsibilities. Provide input and direction for board agendas and, where appropriate, committee or commission board agendas. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Does that mean, should it be committee or commission agendas? That was just confusing. It's C. Under board chair.
So what you're saying is the board should not be in there, is that correct?
Well, it doesn't seem to fit, and I don't know why it's capitalized either.
Yeah. What they may be looking at, what they may be looking at is, we're not going to necessarily give input into committee agendas that aren't under our jurisdiction. Right? Because if they're not SCRD board committees, we wouldn't give input into that, but we would put it, potentially to our own committee.
It says where appropriate, which would seem to cover that, but
Did you want to speak to that?
If there is some further revision / wordsmithing required, we will be happy to work with you.
Okay, so how about if we appoint a subcommittee to work on this? Who wants to do this? Yeah, so we've got Director McMahon and Director Toth. Anybody else? Sorry, hang on one second. I've got to bring somebody else in here. Director Pratt. Awesome. So I'd like a motion to appoint Director McMahon, Director Pratt, and Director Toth as a subcommittee to review the roles and responsibilities and bring that back to the committee. Director McMahon, you moved that? Okay. Director Pratt, second. Any other questions or comments? Director Hiltz.
When would it return? I guess sometime before summer. So there.
What are you up to at lunchtime?
I think there's concurrence that it will probably come back very quickly.
Okay.
We don't have a Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting in December, so it would have to be January, probably be the earliest it could come back.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item C, Annex C, pages 28 through 29. This is 2022 resolutions to the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, or AVIC. Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to bring forward the annual call for topics for AVICC resolutions. The deadline to submit is January 28th. Therefore, if the board identifies topics, staff will bring back draft resolutions for consideration to a standing committee by January 20th to ensure that we meet the deadline for board adoption, which will have to be on January 27th.
So just to be clear, you'd want items to come prior to January 20th, and then, so at the January 20th meeting, we could bring them forward still, or would you like them prior to that so that we could actually discuss them at the 20th?
Yes, as soon as possible, if the topics are provided to staff, then we can at least draft the resolutions, and then the committee could work with those drafts, perhaps, during
the
a
20th.
committee meeting by the 20th.
Okay. Director McMahon.
I have lots of suggested topics. I wondered, though, whether staff had any suggestions around EOC deployments. You know, we've had an opportunity, an unparalleled opportunity to test out our emergency systems. Are they working? Do we feel that changes at the provincial level would make it more feasible for regional districts to run EOCs?
I think that's something we can discuss as part of our after-action plan, after-action debriefs on this deployment, and recognizing that we've had more in the last couple of years than we're used to having. Off the top of my head, without digging into it too much further, which we can do at the debrief session, I think the system is working well. I think in this case, in this latest deployment, the province has definitely been challenged in terms of their responsiveness because of how many EOCs are up and running and the deluge of requests and different things they're being barraged with. But the relationship, like the program seems to be working well. The relationship we have with the province is good, but we're happy to include some of those points as part of our debrief at the end of this deployment.
All right, so there's a recommendation on page 28. And basically just that the Corporate Administrative Services Committee identify resolutions for staff to draft and present to a January 20th, 2022, wow, standing committee meeting for consideration. So I think, I know that they're in email, we're already starting to identify a few, and we could probably continue to work on that. If we got them to corporate officer early January, would give you sufficient time? Okay. Would someone like to make the recommendation on page 28? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to Annex D, pages 30 through 33. So this is, I think I probably would speak to this. Tina, you okay with that? Okay, she's nodding, okay. So I created this little spreadsheet. The spreadsheet takes the taxation items only from the pre-budget items that were given to us. So I took out all the carry forward, everything that was covered, paid off by reserves, only taxation is what's reflected in here. And then we'll take an example. Look at the first one, 110, general government, executive assistant. If you go over to area A, the participation ratio comes out of the budget book, the big budget book. So 14.4% of that 73,102 is what area A would contribute. And the amount, right, the 10,000 is showing there. Percent of budget proposals, that's a total, or a percentage of the total from the bottom of the $1,790,000. So you've been given this as a spreadsheet as well, and that's probably a good thing because we're going to be looking at changing some of those numbers potentially with our next agenda item. One of the questions that directors were talking about was, do we look at a percentage increase? So this spreadsheet is a way for you to look at what is the percentage increase. Because if you go down to the bottom then, right at the bottom of the spreadsheet, we looked at 2021 taxation and figured out what a 1% increase would be based on 2021 taxation. Now we don't know what 2022 is going to be. We still don't have those numbers, but this is a good place to start. So it shows you if, you know, what the 1% would give you, and so what the amount that you would be contributing if all of the items were approved. It gives you a percentage increase for the budget items only. So then Director Lee was talking about, well, we're not looking at rates, you know, rates and frontage fees and all of that, but this gives you this piece of it. You do have it as a spreadsheet as well, so you can go ahead and play with it then. Any questions about the spreadsheet? Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. The percentage I don't believe is actually indicative because it assumes that those functions that didn't have any projects that were dropped to 2022. In other words, it assumes that these projects are incremental to those functions, which is not necessarily correct because we could have had projects in 2021 that we finished, and therefore now there's no increase. So it's pretty hard to tell what the actual percent is accurately.
Okay, so you're saying that some of the items that we approved maybe in 2021 were one-time increases and may drop off. We'd have to go to staff for any clarification on that. Tina?
So those are what's built into the base. Whoops, is there a weird sound there? Sorry. So essentially the base rate has been factored in here. So those have already been reduced. So I think the number you have on your spreadsheet does factor those one-time items dropped off.
So what you're saying is in the base budget that you're bringing forward, that we use to start the pre-budget, that already includes any items that we're anticipating. Well, not everything, because we don't know what's completed yet. We've still got some more work to do on that. But everything that's completed already is already been taken out of that base budget. So these would be incremental to the base as presented. Is that correct?
Well, I want to make sure I'm fully understanding what you mean, and I'm not trying to mislead you.
No. What Director Lee is saying is that perhaps in 2021, we added a project, operational, that has a lifespan. And when that's done, it would reduce the base budget. And then these items would be incremental on top of that adjusted base. We're not saying that those items went onto our 2021 budget, and at the end of the year, we're still staying at that level to move forward into 2022.
That's right. So I think what the area director was mentioning was that if you take the 2021 taxation, you are correct, because we don't need that much taxation. So that's why when we started in the presentation, we were saying that our base budget going into round one at pre-budget, because again, the jello's still moving, is my famous saying. It was actually 0.01, and that is because those one-time projects and whatnot fell off. If anything incrementally, we need to ensure that any incremental are ongoing. So we prorate staffing positions, ongoing costs for some projects had ongoing incremental costs. So those are built into there. So I think what you're trying to say is this isn't necessarily 1% of or growing on top of, because we're already at a lower rate. That's not necessarily how we look at it, because what we do is we compare year over year. And because last year's taxation was quite significant compared to 2022, it looks like we have quite a low floor, because those one-time projects, those fundings are complete and done, and they'll carry forward, but we're not needing the same level of taxation, essentially.
Okay, so now I'm confused. So this number that we've got, so we'll look at Area A, 2,892,247. That number is inaccurate. We know that, because we don't have the 2022 information yet, correct?
Well, we provided some 2022 preliminary information at pre-budget. And essentially it was very near that amount, because essentially some of those one-time projects fell off. But then again, we have collective bargaining wages, et cetera. So our base rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, I'd have to go look at the other agenda, the pre-budget agenda, to go and take a look, but it was very close to this in each area. Overall, it was 0.01%. So if we had to tax, I think at the end, I don't know if you subtotal, no, we didn't subtotal them all. Say it was 24 million we had to tax last year. It's very close to 24 million just from a base budget perspective this year. So I think the exercise you're trying to articulate is, last year we taxed X amount in each of the area. What is a 1% increase over and above that rate? And I think that is what you've articulated here. It doesn't mean, like, the 2021 doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong, but I think what he's saying is, what is the base rate for 2021? But again, yes, that is another way to look at it. But again, when we communicate out to the public, the change, we use the prior year. What did we tax last year? What are we looking to tax this year?
Director Lee?
I thought I had it till that last comment. Because I heard at first that the one-time projects were taken off, therefore these were incremental
Yes.
to a lower figure.
A very, the figure that we're starting with, our base amount
Yeah.
for 2022 is very close to what it was in 2021. You said 0.1%?
0.01.
0.01% difference. After taking off the ones that will fall off and adding in things like staff contract increases, those sorts of things. So that's already been adjusted.
Okay, that's what I understood at the
Yes.
first answer.
Yes.
So I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. So if I recall, the idea was we were talking about setting a what do you call a target. That was what we were talking about. So this is to present information. Is this within our perceived target?
Yes.
So are we talking targets, or are we talking the details about how we're defining all the numbers? So, are we saying no more than 8, no more than 6 collectively within our own areas? Like I'm going, like, is this what we're trying to do?
That was a conversation that had come out among the directors. Like, do we want to look at that? Because if we do want to look at that, we needed to actually be clear about what the percentage was for each area. And then if we give staff that direction, they're going to need to go away and figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, so is that a possible policy direction to give staff based on the information that we know?
Good question. Tina.
Well, I just have the agenda up from the pre-budget session, and what we have is definitely the implication of local service area taxation. So what we're talking about is there's a few different things. If you want to have a goal for a particular area, you may want to take a look at what that would look like. For example, Area B, because they have a lot of very area specific or local service area budget decisions, their taxation, if they approved all the budget proposals that were presented, and if all of those budget proposals still remain funded through property taxation, which we already know most likely won't, they were looking at a 12.61% over the prior year. Now, specifically, they have a very large project proposed through taxation for the fire department. So again, does the board want to look at an overall percentage or a local percentage? Because that may impact some of those local service area proposals. That is the challenge in a regional district. When you press one button, it's like whack-a-mole.
Director McMahon?
Right. So the numbers we're looking at in the spreadsheet are before the allocation of the COVID-19 Safe Restart funds and also before the adjustment of the assessments. But the assessments, well, both of those would presumably lower the impact on taxation somewhat.
Depending on growth. Non-market changes will just shift the pie, and growth will reduce the rate.
All right, directors, what would you like to do? Director Hiltz. No, Director Tighe, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Last week we also discussed 3 more positions in infrastructure services, and I don't think those are in there either. So I guess round 1 will add a whole bunch more things, I assume. Just clarifying.
Yeah, Tina?
Yeah, so just to clarify, these values here are for property taxation only. And I know people don't like the word ad valorem, but it's the property taxation base. The utilities or user fees, so anything related to water, wastewater, refuse collection, and potentially some solid waste, those are user rate recovered. So those are excluded from these figures. And those were articulated and contemplated as part of the user rate reports that were presented to infrastructure last week.
So in other words, those positions were incorporated in the rates that were approved. So if we approve those positions, the revenue would be there. If we don't approve the positions, we would actually have a surplus at year end, potentially.
Generally, the balancing, especially in the water utilities, would be an offset to reserves. So it just means you would have larger contributions to reserves.
Yeah, so surplus that goes to a reserve, yeah. Director Toth.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that when I saw this table in our agenda package, I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing with it. So the conversation's been good to put some context around it. I'm not sure yet how I feel about any of it, but I know there's a couple items in there that I have issue with, but I guess we'll deal with those at the next round of budget.
Director Beamish.
I guess I'm also looking at, anxious to see what the new assessments come out at, because that's going to make a difference on the tax rates, clearly. And also on the fire department, when we're going to be talking in a few minutes, it'd be interesting to see how they impact this year, whether things are up in the projected area of 10-15% that we hear. That lowers the rate as we go up, so we'll see. So we're not that far away from that information.
Thank you. Tina?
I was just going to wait to go last, Chair. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to articulate this tool. I definitely would like to discuss some more when we complete our budget process, because I think this is a good tool for the directors when they're even in the midst of making some budget decisions. Is you can start to see, because our balance tables and what we use in the back are massive data tables. So this is a really simple way to try to figure out, when you're making a decision, how much do I pay into that? So if I contribute 15%, this is a good way to articulate those. So I think this is something I'd like to bring up is having or developing this tool for the future. So I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. It was fun. Yeah, I'm kind of a geek that way sometimes. Director Lee?
I must say, I really do appreciate that last spreadsheet. It doesn't replace the first one, the one we worked with that talked about the carry forwards and everything, because that's basically it reflects the load that staff's going to have. And so, but boy, it sure is valuable as we make our decisions. So yes, I really like it. I have 2 questions. If I've got the spreadsheet right, if all my partners and the library and everybody that isn't on there all comes in at 0, that percent would still be the same, if I've got this right. Is that correct?
Yes, but we most likely know that's probably not the case.
No, of course it isn't, but that gives me a good confidence factor about the figure. And when will we get the tax by area and service by actual dollars? The reason I'm asking that is because I believe that all the projects will be putting their requirements forward for our corporate, which will fill out 110, for instance. And that's a big job to put that thing together. But will we have something like that prior to, well, I was going to say round 1, but I think the answer is no. But when would we get it?
We are planning to have that out as part of the agenda for December 6th.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
So that will be before round 1 budget.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So these numbers could be updated, right? The percentages that you're talking about could be updated from that new book, right? Because these are 2021 numbers, right?
Yeah, we present for part of round 1, so it won't be the total book complete, but it'll have definitely the back end. It's the front narrative type of stuff that sometimes is omitted, because otherwise it's a 400-page document. So, but you'll get a version of it in with your round 1 budget information. And then of course we'll do the live one as we're making decisions.
So it doesn't look like anybody is wanting to identify a percentage at this point. So I think that's what we were looking to have the information to be able to determine. So any other questions or comments? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, the only way I could kind of come up with a reason for a percentage is if we could somehow gauge the economy, right? This is the idea of financial sustainability is increases within the economy in which it operates. And that's like throwing a bunch of darts. Like we don't even have a clue of what our economy does. Other than Colin Stansfield was the first person who came up with a local GDP. So it would be nice to have a KPI about what our economy is growing and to match that up. But I don't think we can do that at this point. So for me, it's like guessing. Spin the wheel and guess. And I'm not willing to just spin the wheel and stick it someplace. So, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, now I've got a huge list. Director Pratt?
Thanks. Not prepared to do or provide any direction to staff at this point, but would like to say thanks, Chair Seegers, for putting this together. It's another tool that we can use to help simplify the complexities of regional district budgeting as we go forward.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thanks to staff for the presentation, the tax presentation they made to our area. It was awesome. I wish I'd had beat the bush a little bit more to get more audience members, but I got a lot of feedback saying if they would have known a little bit more ahead of time, they would have all come. And that was because I only got active myself the day before, where I should have been active a couple weeks before. But it was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Todd?
Thanks, Chair. When I look at not knowing what the partners and stakeholders are going to look like, I wouldn't be comfortable trying to peg a percentage at this point either. But I did want to comment that I've been reading a lot of news alerts showing other municipalities across the country have started releasing their projected tax increases, and most seem to be coming in under 4%. So if we stay, looking at the district of Seashelt impact here, 6.7, if we stay in that 4 to 8%, I think we're doing okay.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, just when it comes to percentages and looking into the future, I think, Director Hiltz has got it right. And one thing to keep in mind is that we're looking at at least 4% inflation rate over the next year. So really 5.67 is barely over inflation. I think it's fairly reasonable.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. Well, I'll just say that if it was in the double digits for Area E, I would probably be hitting the panic button. But since it isn't, and there's a lot of, the jello is still moving, I'm just sitting back and watching to see how it goes. And percentages are arbitrary. They totally are. I get that. On the other hand, people grab onto them and attribute a lot of meaning to percentages.
Thank you. Director Lee?
I'm very comfortable just working through the projects and making sure that they need to be done, and I can justify them in my mind, and I can justify them to my taxpayers. So I don't believe, I'm kind of like Director McMahon though. If it gets big and you start looking at double-digit percentages, that will alarm people. But where we are right now, I've been through all the projects, we need to do them, and I'm quite happy with that figure I'm looking at. So no ceiling from me.
All right, seeing no further hands up. Oh, no, it's going down. No further hands up. We'll move on to number 7, Annex E, pages 34 through 38. This is allocation of remaining COVID-19 Safe Restart grant funds. And this is over to Tina. And Tina, do you have Alex with you as well?
No, just myself. Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
but thank you to him for the help. So I wanted to just provide some background for those public members who may be joining us and are not aware. The regional district did receive joint federal and provincial funding as part of COVID-19 called COVID Restart funding. We received some funding in November of 2020, and then we received an additional top up. So we received up to $762,000. There were some specific uses that we could use the funds for. And so through the 2021 budget, we did allocate some funding as well as an additional amendment for the Seashelt pool for the linear heat detection project. So included in the report is a reconciliation, but in summary, we have approximately $300 and some thousand remaining of the COVID restart funds and are required per the provincial grant to fully allocate those funds, not spend them, but fully allocate them and commit them prior to December 31st of this year. So as such, the staff reviewed some of the proposed initiatives and identified where they may have some synergies with the program and would be able to reduce potential taxation. And so we've identified the hybrid meeting and sort of the boardroom modifications. So it has also been expanded, that particular project, or recommended to be expanded. So that would be updated as part of the round one budget. We've also identified the 2 water management plans for the community recreation facilities and the temporary parks backfill, because that is directly correlated to our increased use in our parks during COVID. We've also identified a new project, and that is to make more permanent barriers associated with our reception facility. Some of those things, when we opened our facility, we kind of pieced them together because supply chains were quite limited then. And so we pieced some stuff together, and we're looking to do something a little more professionalized there. So we would bring a new budget proposal if the board saw fit that they'd want to do that. So again, if there are any questions, we do have the recommendation there on what we see would reduce the taxation and some of the projects here that we have for round one. And so again, this would just be updated at round one.
Thank you. Directors, any questions or comments? Director Toth.
Thank you. Looking at the proposals that are here in the recommendations, I think most of it makes sense. Being the first time I've seen the reception center modifications, I don't know that I'm necessarily ready to support it right now. So I guess the question that I've got for staff is, if this goes to round one and it doesn't move forward, do staff have let's call it a backup plan for spending the remaining $40,000 of COVID money? Thank you.
I would say that would be up to the board. What I would say though is, one of the things we haven't as the regional district really looked at too is some of our community partners and stakeholders and any potential impacts they have related to COVID. So that might be an area that we may want to contemplate if this particular proposal isn't moved forward. I think at this juncture, what we're saying is the board isn't approving this particular project. It's just saying that you're open to having a budget proposal come forward as part of round one for consideration. So we can have that backup plan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, directors? Seeing none, we have some recommendations on page 34. What would you like to do? Director Beamish. Okay, Director Beamish is moving the recommendations. Director Hilt seconded. All those in favor? Thank you, and that passes. So now you have your handy dandy little spreadsheet that you'll be able to go and potentially make some modifications to. Moving on to item number 8, Annex F, pages 39 through 44, Fire Department's 20-year capital funding plans. And over to staff.
Just one moment, staff or chair. We have some staff that I think are in the waiting room. I think Kyle is there. There is also an EOC meeting right now that I think Matt Tripe may be involved in. So we'll try to piece together some of this information here as best we can.
Sorry, could we, do you want to take a break, or do you want to move on to item 9 and 10 and come back? I don't know what kind of time frame we need.
Kyle is here. Kyle, are you okay with taking any questions?
Yeah, I think I can try. There might be a few that the manager of protective services would be better suited to answer. So,
Okay, do we know what timing looks like for, okay, we're just going to check on that. Well, we'll see if it's 10 minutes or if it's half an hour. Right. Okay. We can take a break. All right, it is 10:27. How much of a break would you like? Would you like 10 minutes? All right, we'll be back at 10:37. Thank you. Sorry, Kyle. We'll come back to you. Welcome back to the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, November 25th. We do not have, yes we do, he is here. Mr. Trite will be joining us. Perfect timing. So we are on Annex F. This is the Fire Department's 20-year capital funding plans. And we will turn it over to staff.
Chair, I'll just start by essentially just, I think there's a little bit of confusion on who is going to present. Matt, did you want to go ahead and present, or?
If you'd like me to, yeah, I think you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So what we have here is the 20-year capital plan for 3 of the SCRD fire departments. So the recommendation that the report titled Fire Department 20-year capital funding plans be received for information. It does not cover the Egmont Fire Department at this time, as we're going to wait until the service tax rate bylaw has been approved before we do one for Egmont. And I think that's about it for the intro, and happy to answer any questions.
Directors, questions? Director McMahon.
The nice graphs show spending for equipment. So like in 2033, I think it is here. I'm looking at Gibson's. Pretty sure I'm looking at Gibson's. On page 42?
Yes.
Good. Yes, there it is. So I assume that the big amount in 2033 would be a fire truck or another major vehicle. Is any upgrades to the fire hall included in here?
I don't believe there's any major upgrades. I'll just able to defer to Mr. Doyle on that one.
Thank you for the question, Chair and Director. Man. So the upgrades, the halls are in the orange there, and what this the capital plans for protective services, as mentioned in the report, they consider only the critical components. So what is essential for the service to deliver the function, and that includes the maintenance of the fire hall structure, the roof, all the critical items.
So to follow up on that, no expansion, but maintenance and of the existing.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see other hands up. I have a question and a comment. Page 40, under options and analysis, indicates that there's the capacity to implement the AEP is not available in 2022 due to the workload associated with local government elections. Beyond 2023, it was determined it would be feasible to conduct AEPs to allow for longer-term debt for fire apparatus. So we do recognize that the corporate services division has a lot to handle in 2022. So I actually threw a suggestion out, and I'd like to talk about it here, and that is that we contract out the election. So we actually talked about it during pre-budget or during our agenda review, so I look over to staff for that.
Thank you, Chair. So just from staff's perspective, our path to carry out a project when we already have a full work plan in an agenda year might be best conducted if we contract out the actual special project. So the regional district election the work on that for legislative services will also bring in not just myself as chief election officer, but all legislative services staff will really have a role in this. We have maybe 12 to 14 polling stations and upwards of potentially 8 ballots, depending if we have an elector approval process. So it does take up a good portion of our year. And if we are moving forward with projects that have electoral approval attached to them. So the fire trucks are one example, but other examples might be the establishment of a service. Depending on who the electors are that have to participate in that process, we can also organize aligning that with the election. So for example, if it was determined, not necessarily for the fire trucks, but for another project to establish a service, and we needed to go to referendum, and at some point in the year it's determined it's a regional referendum, then we have to further appoint a regional voting officer, because we'll be also conducting elections in the municipality. So I think from our perspective, operationally, it's best for staff to stay committed to the actual local election and then look at how we can bring in other resources to move forward these additional projects, which may or may not align with that timeline.
Okay, and I'll just give directors kind of what my rationale for looking at that was, is with the election in 2022, and we know staff's resources are committed to that. If we do not bring in additional resources to assist, potentially then with the AAPs, staff's workload is pretty much planned out for the next 2 years. So there's no capacity to do anything else because we've got all the AAPs and things that have to happen around these. If we've got an election happening, if we can bring in additional resources on a contract basis to handle part of that, that actually really will impact the corporate services, legislative services, everything for the years following. So.
Correct, because things tend to get pushed forward to after the election. And there already are projects on the books for 2022 in addition to the election. So we pretty much have our work plan in our minds, and depending on how budget turns out, we're clear on what we need to move forward with.
Thank you. Director Beamish and then Director McMahon.
I guess I'm a little concerned that's a significant increase in the Gibson's end. I didn't do the calculation in terms of percentage for under the fire department, but and again, we don't know on the 100,000 taxation what that's going to be, given the increase in property values. It's probably not going to be $1.80. Well, could be $1.80. My question to Tina was, do we project anywhere into the property values when we look at those numbers? Like when we say $100.81 per 100,000 population is the increase. What if the property values have increased 20%? Does that become a lower number that we're going to be looking at?
Yes, on both of those fronts. And essentially on page 40 of the report, it does estimate what the tax impact is going to be per 100,000 of assessment. And again, those are using 2021 values. So yeah, they're subject to change. So if they, you're right, if they do increase 20%, but again, like I said, it's based on the growth would reduce the tax rate.
Yeah.
It is the apportionment. So if Town of Gibson's had a larger increase relative to area F and E, it would see a larger share on their side.
Yeah.
But the tax rate would still remain the same.
Right. Yeah, that somewhat concerns me, just not knowing that dollar amount there. Yeah. Okay, for now, thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, we didn't have a chance to talk about that at the Fire Commission either, because the report wasn't available at that time. I'm trying to get my head around how much resources are required for an AAP versus a referendum. And then that third factor I hadn't thought about, which is if we were doing a referendum on a service establishment that included the municipalities, that probably cranks it up again. Whereas the AAP for the fire departments, that probably would only include the rural areas. So could you give me a sort of an idea of how big an elephant each of those is?
Thank you for the question. So I did talk to the the asset manager about the timing of these AAPs, and we talked about something that other local governments are doing, other regional districts. It's a unified AAP process, so we thought there might be an opportunity to group together several and run them concurrently at the same time. But the thought at the time was probably the election year wouldn't be the year to run concurrent AAPs, but we could do that early 2023. And from a financial perspective, I believe that worked well for the program. The difference, I would say, we have run AAPs in election years, and when we do that, typically we would try to conduct those very early in the year. And the timing around the municipal inspector approval is the biggest delay in the process, so it could be 4 to 5 months. It could take us up to June to complete an AAP if we started early in the year. By that time, though, we're pretty heavy into the election. So I know we did it in 2018, and it was very, very challenging, which is why we've talked about perhaps moving the unified AAP process to early 2023 and still not really knowing what other approval processes might come forward for 2022. So trying to align all of those, it would make more sense to align the referendum, frankly, with the election than to try and conduct a unified AAP process and an election. I don't know if that helps.
So what if we had a question on the ballot? That's a referendum, basically, right? Rather than AAP, you just run a referendum,
Yes, it is.
right? So, because everybody's coming together anyway. So it just is a different process.
Yes.
Gets you there a different way.
For these capital funding, I believe that would also include the town of Gibson's. So then we would require a regional voting officer as well, because we would have to be responsible for running the ballot at the town as well.
Sorry,
Whereas if we do an AAP, we can do a regional AAP, and we can conduct it as we did for the water metering with the District of Sechelt. We don't need to separate it out.
Okay, I've got Director Lee, and Tina, did you want to speak first, or do we want to go to Director Lee first?
I was just going to mention, Chair, that we do have other things that are upcoming. So in our proposed initiative, and we kind of talked about this in agenda review, is the Half Moon Bay Fire Hall is undergoing a significant review and assessment for development of Hall 2. So if there's any progression, because what we're talking about here is existing capital. So if there is any development associated with that, likely additional funding would be required. So we just want to be mindful that we're not running back-to-back-to-back AAPs. So from a timing perspective, the 2023 would potentially align with that particular item. So back to the unified, that would likely be something for consideration. And to be in time for that for this year is I think, probably ambitious.
Thank you. Director Lee and then Director Toth.
I'm kind of off subject, so if we finished the this one, I got a question, but
Okay, Director Toth?
I mean, it's a general process question around AAPs and referendums. I can ask it now, or I can save it for later. You mentioned that if we ran a referendum or added a question to the ballot that included the municipalities, the SCRD essentially has to take over the election process for the municipalities. Is that a legislative thing or a security of the ballot thing, or?
Thank you. To clarify, not the entire election process, but we would be responsible for the assent vote ballot. That would be at the polling stations for the District of Sechelt or the town of Gibsons or the SIGD.
Okay.
So we would appoint what's called a regional voting officer, similar to a chief election officer, but that regional voting officer would just be responsible for running that assent vote in multiple jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you for that.
Right, so it would be a separate ballot, right? It would be a separate ballot with a question. So those who were eligible up and down the coast to vote would be presented with that, but that would have to be run separately. Like in the district of Sechelt, town of Gibson's, our elections officer would not run that piece. Somebody else would have to do that. Okay. Director McMahon, and Tina still got her hand up too. Tina, do you want to go first?
Well, I just wanted to clarify, Chair, that these amounts that are articulated in these charts are taking into consideration any debt servicing that we have. So I don't believe these numbers would change. And I'm going to look to our asset manager to confirm that. But I believe, regardless of conducting the AAP, these figures here to deliver or to fund only the critical infrastructure for the fire departments. We're not talking about anything that is still needed. So some critical equipment, or actually really needed equipment, isn't considered. This is the base level funding to sustain the current equipment is required. It factors in debt servicing for the future. So I just wanted to note that. Maybe it was clear, but I just wanted to ensure that.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Right. So I just wanted to talk a little bit here about reserves, because if I understand this correctly, at this time, we do not have a policy on what a sufficient reserve is for any either operational or capital reserves. And so where are we going with this? Are we going to establish policies? And presumably it would differ according to what kind of a service it is and whether it's operating or capital and the size of the assets that we are invested in, like in our water system. So what are going to be the next steps in this?
If I may, Chair, essentially, this is your policy decision right now. You're making a policy decision for the fire departments related to the sustainable service level. So as a regional district, having a carte blanche or a policy decision related to reserves is tackled service by service, because it really depends on what service level you are deciding to provide as service participants. So it wouldn't necessarily be a policy that says we will fund 10%, because again, that might mean different things for different functions. So that is why we are bringing these forward, because in essence, you are making the policy decision. This is the policy decision for the capital reserve. You were saying that you are working towards. And again, if you do not want to fund just critical infrastructure and you want to have, I forget the different criterias, but if you wanted to fund a different service level, then again, that's a policy decision. From an operational standpoint, that would be the next iteration of this.
I have Director Beamish.
Yeah, I guess I'm questioning what decision are you asking for us to make today to actually approve the increase? I'm looking at Gibson's from 200,000 to 272, or is it, as this is said in the first line here, that this is received for information?
Well, I think that's up to the board. There's two paths that you can make here. You can approve this particular recommendation in here. You can also move this information to the round one budget deliberations. But the way we see it is the budget typically focuses on project level decisions. And this is talking more of policy level decisions. So we weren't recommending this move forward as part of the budget. However, we understand it does have financial implications. So essentially in here, we do have a recommendation that we receive it for information, but there is subsequent recommendations that we do increase these starting in 2022. I believe on page 39, there are some recommendations there.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, Chair, I'm not prepared to make that recommendation of that increase today without having more detail and perhaps hearing from the Fire Commission as well. It's a significant change, and as I say, the lion's share of that cost will go to the town of Gibson's. So I'd like to have more detail on that and the implication, and perhaps even dealing with our own finance department on that, ask them.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Right. I'm generally in agreement with Director Beamish because we're looking at this part of the fire budget without other increases to operating as well. So I'd kind of like to look at the overall tax increase for fire services before we come to a decision, and maybe look at a different approach, like as Gibson's has done with their water, increasing by a certain percentage every year for the next 5 years to get to a particular level, something like that. But I would like to see what the overall impact on the fire service is going to be.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I've been wrestling with a very similar situation in Egmont, and I actually had a question. Has the board already seen the details of the proposed capital expenditures? Have you seen them somewhere else already? Do you know what's in those figures?
I think they're taken from the graphs that are presented, but I don't know if there's any other information provided to date. If you have questions about that, they probably have the information, can present it to us. Move that forward.
That was my next question. Is that something that we should be seeing prior to looking at a situation like this? The reason I asked is I did find one graph for Egmont, which it really helped clarify, and it talked about the capital expenditures by year and what they were. And I really did appreciate that graph, and it was a one-pager. And so I thought it would add value to something like this, but that's up to you guys.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, thank you. I personally don't have any issues with the Roberts Creek recommendation, so I'd be happy to move that, but I guess we'll have to see how everybody else feels.
Okay, I think there's a bigger question that we're being asked here. And one is, do we only want to fund critical assets? And what's the other? Critical, the critical and, hang on, finding it here. Basically the status quo plus critical assets, maintenance of the building. What about expansion? And where does that come into the conversation? At what point are we going to have information to actually be able to address that? And I think this is why we've got our asset manager here. Do we know what the plan is in working with protective services for long-range planning for fire halls, for expansion of service given populations, all those sorts of things? Has that conversation started? Where are we at inside of that?
Thank you, Chair. So the task that has been undertaken by asset management at this point has been more of a retrospective look at what we have and looking to achieve the sustainable delivery of the service and ensure that the service that we have can be delivered moving forward for the 20 years that are identified in the plan. As far as the strategic growth side of things, that has not been a conversation that has started yet. It is something that we could look to do in the future. Now, a lot of what has been presented, what dictates the equipment, especially in these reports, is the fire underwriter survey and the requirements for protection to achieve the insurance levels that the residents have. So to answer your question, what's on the reports now is only maintaining the service level that exists. Historically, the service level was set at what we've defined as critical assets only. So those that are needed to deliver the critical function of the service, and nothing more. As the CFO alluded to earlier, most of the equipment and most of the assets in the fire service are considered critical. So there's not a huge variance as opposed to some of the other services we look at between the service levels, but there are some differences there.
Thank you. So what you're saying is the recommendations in front of us on page 39 do not anticipate any increase in service. It's to keep the current service level for the next 20 years? That's what we're funding?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's correct. And then I believe there are some separate proposals going around regarding certain hall redevelopments or significant upgrades that would be covering the growth side of things, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Director Ties and then Director McMahon.
Yeah, I think that's a much larger conversation that needs to be had as part of the regional growth strategy. If the Lower Mainland is any indication, there's a slow migration from a volunteer fire force to professional fire forces, as well as adding more halls as density increases. I would think in Roberts Creek, that around Joe Road, there would be probably another opportunity if we have another opportunity to put a hall there, that I think that would be a good idea at some point as density increases. But I don't think we're ready to go down that path at this point.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, at this time, if we needed a budget placeholder, I'd be happy with a 10% increase as a placeholder for right now. We do need to dive deeper with the Fire Commission because there's a lot of questions here, and we're also going to be seeing the census figures in the new year, and that's one of those pieces of information that helps to inform decisions about future fire service needs. So I don't want to try and dive into the details here, but we do need to have the conversation. It's not, we're not going to be able to have a full conversation about this, I don't think, in time for this year's budget process.
Director Beamish.
I guess I'm looking at the last recommendation on the page, page 39, and I assume that's a subsequent report be brought forward. Further, a subsequent, I'm assuming, report be brought forward to the Plan and Development Committee in Q2 of 2022, which seems to focus on the same issues. And I'm just wondering if that's where we should be putting this, is to talk about. I don't mind incremental increases. I think that they're smart, as Director McMahon says. I think that ensuring that the department stays relevant and is able to meet needs. It's these 35% increases that cause concern and jumps that I question. So how does this decision here, recommendation, I guess number 2 I'm looking at here, jive with the last recommendation on the page? Are they two different things, or are they part of the same thing?
And staff?
Hey.
Go ahead.
I believe they're two different things, especially if there's a different decision than what's outlined here, then I think staff would also have to contemplate what is the implication of that, because we have some fire departments who may not be able to buy some of the critical infrastructure they need or critical equipment based on any different decision than here, because essentially a lot of the reserves have been used to fund very expensive equipment of late. So I think whatever decision, we'd have to further explore what implications they would have associated with the plans that were presented last June, and see what impact that would have. It just means that we would be impacting some years, and I don't know whether or not they're in the next 3 to 5 years. I know, especially for Egmont, that will be the case. But as far as Gibson goes, I know they have a very significant piece of equipment for 2023 that's planned. So,
Okay, so I want to look at breaking this down. So Gibson's and District Volunteer Fire Department, it sounds like you'd like to go back to the Fire Commission and be able to revisit this at a later time once you've had conversations with them. Is that correct?
And more detail.
Okay, and more detail about what this is. So could this be referred to round 1 budget? Would that be sufficient time for you? That's 3 weeks, 4 weeks? No? Well, if it gets referred to round 1 budget, then we can carry it forward. It doesn't have to be approved there. It can move forward to round 2, but it doesn't get lost. Tina, would that be the direction we'd do? Put into round 1?
yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay. Again, then if you need more time, we can move it forward to round 2 without making a decision at that point. But at least it moves into the process. Okay. Roberts Creek, sounds like Director Ties is okay with this proposal? Yes, thank you. Half Moon Bay, Director Pratt.
Thanks. I think I'll follow the same lead as the Gibsons and area fire to, and move it forward to round 1.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Do we need a motion here to
Yes, soon. We just
call, well, I was thinking to call a meeting of the Fire Commission, or can we, how do we handle it?
I don't know.
And I just wanted to say that I'd like to have all the information in one place at a time, like this report plus the reserve balances plus the operating that we just had in the budget and all the information. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'm expecting at round 1 we will get more information then about this proposal, which might help Director Beamish with the details.
So you're looking for all of the information to come forward, like further, like not just this recommendation, you're looking for the complete package. That probably isn't a round 1 issue. That would be something probably with your Fire Commission that you'd want to deal with. Yeah, Tina?
You answered it. Yeah, I think what you're looking at is just all of the different information. So we've presented information at multiple meetings, and I mean, the links are here. Short of not trying to make this agenda gargantuan, but I think you want to kind of walk through this stuff a little bit more. I'm not sure that's been fully understood, is what I'm hearing from the Gibson side of the house. So I think you're wanting to understand what equipment is required, what is the funding levels. So again, some of the information's provided, but I think you kind of need almost like a walkthrough.
I
that
think
isn't a round 1. It would be almost a special meeting.
right,
Or,
but we
or
would,
presented at the Fire Commission, however you see fit.
sounds like it would be a Fire Commission, because they would also be looking to the Fire Department, the Commission, to be providing some of that information and some clarification. Okay, Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
Right. When is round 2? So we should, I think, strike a meeting of the Fire Commission before round 2.
January 24th to 26th.
Okay, then maybe right at the beginning of January would be a suitable time.
Okay, Director Lee.
Yes, thank you. I think the challenge probably is that there's only a Fire Commission for Gibsons. There is no Fire Commission for Half Moon, Roberts Creek, or Egmont. So I don't know how this very same information would be presented to those directors, but I believe, well, except for Roberts Creek, I think Roberts Creek's, well, first of all, there wasn't a very big increase, so I think they're pretty comfortable anyways with their whole plan. but I don't believe Half Moon or Pender are that comfortable with it. So how does that information get presented other than what Tina was just suggesting? That was the question in my mind.
So let's look at two recommendations. One dealing with what we've got here, and then one dealing with the information that we're looking at to be able to make those decisions. So on page 39, where we've received the report, and then what we'd like to do is have the recommendations for Gibsons and District Volunteer Fire Department, Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department be referred to round one budget, and that the annual funding commitment towards capital renewal for Roberts Creek Volunteer Fire Department be increased to $157,000 from $150,000, and that the capital renewal funding plan for the Egmont District Volunteer Fire Department be presented once the service's tax rate by law has been approved, that the 2022-2026 draft financial plan be amended accordingly, and further that a subsequent report be brought forward to the Planning and Development Committee in in Q2 2022, outlining the planning process for the alternative approval process in 2023 in contemplation of borrowing needs for future capital replacement needs for the fire services. That would be the recommendation here. And that's moved. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any other modifications to this recommendation? All those in favor? Well, this would be, and this is A, B, D, E, and F, and Gibson's. Okay. Everybody's okay. Perfect. So now let's deal with the information that you're looking for and the meetings, et cetera. Director Beamish.
Chair, I think one thing we will have in January clearly is going to be the 2021 assessments are going to come out that our taxes are going to be based on. That'll be helpful information, I think, to look at as well.
Thank you. Okay, so now we need to find out, how do the Fire Commission meetings happen? Who calls them? Who sets them up? Go ahead, Director McMahon.
Well, I'm going to assume that any participant in the Fire Commission can call a meeting. Generally, the fire chief sets them up. So let's ask the fire chief to set a meeting.
Okay, will you take that on? Perfect, awesome. So then what information will you need to have at that meeting? Because the information you need would then, it sounds like it's also being requested by the Egmont Fire Department, or the director for Egmont and the director for Half Moon Bay. Director McMahon.
So this report, any budget items that we've already gone through related to the fire department, because there were several, I think there were 3. And some information, even if it's verbal, on the AAP, like the AAP for the extended borrowing period and how this fits into the plan.
I think you also were looking for reserves.
Right, and reserve balances, thank you.
Okay. And would you like that presented by, like, separate? So this report, for example, has all of the fire departments in it. Would you like the information for Gibson's put together in one? I think the others may like that as well, rather than having to pull from different reports, because you're going to be dealing with other people on the committee. They don't necessarily need to see all the other information.
Honestly, it doesn't matter a great deal to me.
Okay. All right, would you like to make a recommendation that that information be collated and provided probably prior to the next Gibson's Fire Commission meeting?
Right, provided to the next Fire Commission meeting.
All right, is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. Now, would this be only voting E, F, and G, right? E, F, and Gibson's. Okay. So all those in favor of this? Right. Thank you. So then, Egmont and Half Moon Bay, what would you like? Director Beamish, you have your hand up. Are you?
Chair, just to add to the conversation, I'd like our Director of Finance for Gibson's to be invited to that meeting and part of that, receive that information.
Thank you. All right. Director Pratt, Director Lee, what information would you like?
I would, so personally, I would say the same kind of information that Director McMahon has just asked for, what's already coming up in the hopper, what we've already said yes to. The challenge is as Director Lee said, is in our areas, we don't actually have a fire commission meeting. So it's trying to, it's going to mean, I'm just going to have to wrap my head around how to disseminate the information out to my community.
Okay, Director Lee?
Yes, I have the same, the reason I was quiet is I have the same issue as Director Pratt, and that is once I get the information, once we compile the information, how do we present it? And what motion would we need to abscond with some staff time? Because of course it's going to take staff time. And I don't know if that's a separate project or if it just carries on part of what we got. Do we need a motion to use staff time to compile that information? I don't know that.
So to compile it specifically for Egmont?
Yes. Or I guess the same thing would be
Or
true with
for Half Moon Bay?
Half Moon Bay. Yes.
Yes. Tina? How would you like to?
Well, from staff's perspective, the information has been provided. It's just, I don't think you have it all at your fingertips right here open. Or I think it's a lot of information that's, I think, difficult to sometimes fully comprehend all the different moving parts. So I don't know what is envisioned as far as additional information. We've got some of the reserve balances that are built into the tables. So I'm just curious if you're wanting a continuity schedule financially, so we can provide some of that. We can provide some different slides. It's just capacity I'm concerned of. It's a short time frame to get some of this information through. So, I mean, we'll do the best we can, but I'm just curious to what level of detail, because we've provided, I think, as much detail as we can for Egmont in preparation for the bylaw amendment. So I feel like the information's there prepped for that information. It has been presented to the public. I think for Area B, again, we haven't had any public forums per se, other than these particular staff reports. Town of Gibson's, they have a fire commission, so we can collate some of that information. We can try to replicate some of the slides and then maybe see whether or not there is opportunities at a future committee, at a January Planning and Community Development Committee, that we can present some of the other areas, because we don't have a fire commission. That would be an alternative as well. I don't see it taking more than 3 or 4 slides per fire department. I don't think it needs to be overly complicated. I think what you're looking for, if what I've heard is where the reserve balance is right now, what are the capital needs, what are the funding implications, what is the debt servicing, and a little more information as to what some of those equipment pieces that you're wanting to purchase are. That's kind of what I've heard so far.
I think that's what I'm hearing at the table here too. I think what I'm also hearing though is that currently the reports are all the fire departments, and what the two directors would like is just pulling that information out of the various reports and putting it in one report for that fire department. So I don't think they're looking for additional information. They're looking for all the information on a particular fire department in one place, so that gives them the information to be able to engage with their communities. Director Lee, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Tina actually hit it right on the nose. And in fact, over the last 2 weeks, I've got a package that's almost like that now. I think I need like one more slide, and I've got it. So I think I'm good, but I would like to see what's put together for the Gibsons, just as a check to see if I do have everything. But Tina's got a very good grasp on it. She clearly articulated what I needed.
Thank you. But you want it for Egmont?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Director Pratt?
Similar for me, our CFO said everything fairly well. Honestly, I have no problem setting up the meeting with my community and even doing the slideshow, all of that. I would just honestly need a couple of sets of eyes from the staff side to make sure that I'm understanding everything when I do the presentation, and just the slide template, and I'm good and I can do it. So within our timelines.
Thank you. Tina, do you need a resolution for that? Our corporate officer is nodding her head.
Also, could I have clarification? Is the resolution to provide the information to the directors so that they may be presented at a community meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And it would be great if that could be a resolution.
Okay, so do you have a resolution you'd like us to make?
I have something.
Okay.
So that the staff report, reserve balances, 2022 budget items and initiatives, as well as information on the AAP process, be forwarded to the Half Moon Bay Director and the Area A Director with respect to the Fire Department capital plans, to be presented at community meetings for consultation?
For their use.
For their use?
For their use.
Okay.
I don't think they're looking for staff to assist with that.
Okay.
They're looking at doing that themselves.
To be presented at a community meeting?
Yes. Or to be shared with their community or something like that.
Operations and capital.
Operations and capital.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Tina?
Yeah, please don't take this, the staff can support. Definitely, I'm sure between Matt, Kyle, and I, we can support it. It's just depending on how many meetings that we want to have, and also recognizing that we have the area-specific budget sessions planned as well for January. So just mindful of the number of community meetings that we're going to have. So that's all. We're here to help.
Thanks. All right, would someone like to make the recommendation that has been provided? And this.
I will
and this
make
would
that
be ABD
recommendation.
Yeah, A, B, D, E, F, and Gibsons, because or is it all? It'll be all probably, because it's individual fire departments. Voting all, okay. So motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. All right, thank you. We made it through that one. We have, thank you, Mr. Trite and Mr. Doyle. Insurance invoices over 100,000. And 2021 Municipal Insurance Association and Aon Reed Stenhouse. This is manager of purchasing and risk management. Ms. Kropp.
Thank you. As you will see, we're still in a high demand insurance market, which gives us lower coverage options that are available. Insurance rates have also continued to rise, and this seems to be a growing trend across all local governments. There's been a lot of conversations within the risk field around people's rates skyrocketing in a lot of the things. As these are our estimate amounts for the final premiums, we'll report as part of round 2 budget deliberations, and staff are happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors. Questions, comments? Seeing no questions, there are some recommendations on page 45. What would you like to do? Director Hiltz?
Sure, I'll move the recommendations as presented on page 45.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded. Seeing no further questions or comments, this is voting all directors. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Kropp. Moving on to item number 10, 2022 I think that's supposed to be 2022, 2023 BC Transit Annual Operating Agreement Draft Budget. And this is over to Ms. Gagnon.
Good morning. As part of the annual planning cycle with BC Transit, in the spring we will enter into discussions regarding our annual operating agreement. Because our fiscal years do not align, BC Transit provides us with a draft budget now in Q4 so that we can project our operating budgets for the following year, even though we won't actually sign our operating agreement until probably Q2 of next year. This draft 3-year budget is reflective of the pieces of our service that are cost shared between the SCRD and BC Transit as part of the annual operating agreement. The draft budget provided by BC Transit acknowledges that passenger revenue in 2022-2023 remains lower than pre-pandemic levels, but does continue to increase through to year 3, where it is anticipated that ridership will be back to 100%. It also reveals increased expenditures that are being realized by BC Transit. Expense increases include the costs related to enhanced cleaning and sanitization of our buses that has now been added to the fixed costs in the base operating agreement, as well as increased expenses that in many cases exceed the cost of annual inflation: fuel, information systems, insurance. Staff has presented a projected budget that recommends the use of operating reserves to help mitigate the tax increase that would otherwise be required to offset the reduced revenues and the increased expenditures. This is in alignment with what the reserve funding is intended to do. The values presented are estimates and are subject to change when the AOA is presented in 2022. Also, the draft budget presented today in your report is not reflective of any of the budget proposals that are coming forward to the board to deliberate in round 1 of budget. Despite the ongoing operating challenges presented by the pandemic, the transit service remains in a healthy financial position. I want to take this opportunity to thank Manager Wing for his assistance with this report and his patience as he has answered many, many questions. And we are both here to answer any questions that you might have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any hands up yet, so I'm going to jump in with a question on page 49. Right above where it says current financial state, in that paragraph, the first sentence talks about increased BC Transit management costs. Are those a small amount? Are they a large amount? Do we know what they are?
We've certainly been presented with a detailed budget, which from a Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, we have to keep at a fairly high level for the discussion of communities' public consumption. But I would suggest that the increased expenditures vary everywhere from 2% up to 15%. So information systems and some of the new technology that BC Transit is trying to bring across their management includes fuel, insurance, like all those kind of costs are all in there, and they're varied. And the bottom line is obviously presented to you here today, but they do vary.
But you are provided with those details and can go into them and ensure that they're reasonable given what they're doing, and they can validate them for you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I was interested in the enhanced cleaning aspect of it, and does that enhanced cleaning have to do with the air filters in the bus and the ventilation systems, air conditioning, as we learn more about virus spread through air? Is that considered in their enhanced cleaning? Thank you.
So I actually am not 100% into the operating detail of that. However, I do know that it requires, we have daily cleaning of high touch areas, and we do have a weekly complete disinfection of the buses themselves. The air systems, I don't believe are included in that enhanced cleaning. We have certain public education on the buses. Ridership and consumer confidence is obviously critical and key to how we're trying to get people back on the buses. Masks are mandatory. We have people enter from the front of the bus and exit to the back of the bus. We encourage space between people, but it's, I would suggest, no different than sitting and in our car with someone else or sitting in an office with someone else in terms of the challenges that the pandemic provides. But to my knowledge, we do not include the filters and the air systems of the bus in that enhanced cleaning.
Thank you. This would be a question for our corporate officer, or sorry, our chief financial officer. And sorry, I did not bring this up during the agenda review. On page 50, right above the table, it says it's recommended that 133,401 of reserve funding be budgeted for 2022 and 62,217 for 2023, etc. And it goes on to that. But then if we go down to page 51, it indicates that right at the top, the values presented are estimates and subject to change throughout the remainder of the budget process. So the recommendation is that we, at this point, update the budget values using the information that is here. And, you know, that the 2022-2026 financial plan be updated. Are we in a position, do we have enough certainty to update that, or do we need to wait for more information to be able to do that? You know, maybe we have to come back and do it again? Tina?
Yeah, so I think at this point, and I'm going to ask Brad or Shelley to jump in if I go off the rails. So I think right now what we're doing is we're talking about the existing service level. So what we're approving is what we need to do to fund the existing service envelope that BC Transit and the SCRD has agreed to. The budget proposals are additional or different service level decisions. And so at this point, we are just saying, in order to fund the base envelope, this is what we're requesting. Some of the other changes too, in receiving the full COVID-19 restart funds and us now having our own operating reserve, is that there was implied in that the historical reserve that BC Transit held for us, we now have control over that. And so that's partly what we're doing for this particular report, is to take part of that non-shareable costs of BC Transit and trying to use some of those operating reserves in order to fund the existing service levels. So any decisions that you'd be making subsequent to this would be related to budget proposals and the sources of funding. And a lot of those sources of funding that you have, for instance, ongoing cleaning and staffing for COVID-19 are funded from the operating reserves. So it indirectly has been contemplated. I guess what I'm saying is it's not a yes or no, but I think what you're doing right now is just making a decision about the existing service levels and the source of funding.
So in the recommendation on page 48, where it says that we update it to reflect the draft annual operating budget values, we would actually be approving what is above that table on page 50?
Yes, that is correct.
That's correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I may just add to Tina's answer, I think what the sentence that you referred to in terms of sort of the unknowns is that we're asking you to support this to help us build a base budget for consideration in the budget process. However, in the spring, as the AOA comes forward, and it comes forward at that time for the board to approve, if there are differences that have been realized through that time frame, that would become part of that report and would be and may or may not require a financial amendment at that time. But this allows us to move forward with developing our base budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go to Director Hiltz and I'll come back and look at this recommendation.
Yeah, the question about the recommendation is if it's going to be updated, what are the numbers to be updated? I think that's kind of what we're talking about? Does a number have to be in that recommendation? So that's where I am.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at as well. So if it, instead of just be updated to reflect the draft, I think what we're looking at is we'd actually like the particulars from page 50. So the numbers, what the reserve fund number is, the 2023 number, all of those particulars in the recommendation, so that when we come back and revisit it, we actually have that in front of us without having to go to the report.
Thank you. We can certainly add that to the resolution. I just smile because I think Tina and I took that out.
Yes.
So we absolutely will put the dollar value of utilizing the operating reserve in 2022 of $133,401, and in 2023 of $62,217 toward the operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a potential recommendation. All right. I'll actually make that recommendation. I can make recommendations. And there's seconded. Any other questions, comments? Director McMahon, Director Beamish.
I guess my question is, why do we need a 2% budget increase at all, given the surpluses and reserves that we have?
That's a very good question. I'll start and then I will turn it over to Manager Wing, because he had a lovely explanation for me, because that was my first question is, what are the amounts? What should we put in there? And I think what he has tried to do is just see a gradual mitigation of the eventual tax increase that we will see, because at some point in time, we're going to have to pay the piper, so to speak. But I will, so he provided an amount for you that got us to a reasonable increase in our mind, and was also fairly consistent with what was projected last year. But I will turn it over to Manager Wing to provide further explanation.
Yes, thank you. I think what GM Ganaw said is accurate. So what we're trying to do is just smooth or stabilize the taxation over the next 3 years for the planning period. If we were to reduce taxation for the current year to say 0%, then what we would presumably see next year is a 4% increase. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is just stabilize so that we're seeing consistent, stable and manageable tax increases over the planning period.
Director Beamish?
Chair, I understand the concept and I appreciate it. And I just wonder if this is the year to when we're looking at going into a surplus year from this year and transferring, looking at the current financial status, projecting a surplus of $300,000 plus for this year. Things are still getting hit pretty hard financially, and I'm just wondering if this is a year that we take a break on tax increases, or as much as possible, and not look at. I mean, we have a good surplus. We have a good reserve balance. We're not talking about a lot of money in terms of the overall 2%. And I'm just wondering if we actually need to add 2% this year if we take a look at it again next year. I'm concerned that we keep doing it, and I understand cost of living increases and need to do that, but I just wonder, there are times when we're running surpluses that we should pay that money back to the people who paid it.
I'm wondering if the Transit Future Plan plays into this. Do we, and how our funding of that plays into these increases. We know that there will potentially be an expansion of service in the next few years. I don't know what that looks like at this point. And our costs then will most likely go up. Is that something that's anticipated in here? So we're contemplating that so we can actually put money aside ahead of time? It's
an excellent question. And The contemplation does not include any expansion. So if, when we're entering our annual operating agreement discussions and we want to contemplate expansion in the future years, there will be an increase. It may not be realized in 2023, depending on the expansion and the timing of that, but certainly in 2024. So that is not contemplated in here. This is based on no change to service.
So this is taking into account the fact that we may not have the revenues coming in that we hope to have. I mean, we'd love to have it at 100% service, but or 100% utilization. It's not there yet. We're still building that. So we're ensuring that we have sufficient at year end and dealing with what if happens this year.
So this absolutely recognizes that the revenue is not back to 100%. It actually anticipates it at, the percentages are different in the report and the table because of the difference in the fiscal years. So BC Transit recognizes 65% revenue recovery in year 1, 85% in year 2, and 100% recovery in year 3. How that equates in our own little annual budget's a little bit different, but it's fairly close. And that's an assumption. So we do have to watch that because that may or may not occur. Obviously, their priority is rebuilding ridership, and we are seeing increases in ridership again, but we're not there. So if next year we look at this again and we see where ridership is at and we adjust accordingly. But right now, this is hopeful that we will achieve 100% ridership in year 3, but that is yet to be seen and needs to be closely monitored.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation on the floor. Any other questions or comments about the recommendation on the floor? Director Hiltz.
Yes, Chair. Just clarifying about Director Beamish. If what he's saying is draw more from reserves to reduce the tax load, is that what you're kind of thinking? And what would that
Yeah, I guess
amount be?
reserves or surplus. I mean, surplus until it goes into reserves is surplus. So the surplus we have for 2021 would more than cover that 2% increase we're looking at, and still there would still be surplus.
Is that interpretation correct, staff?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation on the floor. I think we're going to call a vote on this and see where it goes. All those in favor of the recommendation as presented? Any opposed? And would you like that recorded?
No, not necessarily.
Thank you. All right, that is our last item on the agenda. Thank you all for your patience as we worked our way through some of these. We have one attendee in the gallery. I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And I think we have one attendee, but I don't think he probably has any questions. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next meeting.